Hello, I'm Marion Halliday, and this is part two of a recent conversation that we recorded with Robin McAlpine, who's Head of Strategy Development at Commonweal. Robin founded Commonweal, which is often described as a think tank, which it is, but much more importantly than that, it's a campaigning group which campaigns for social and economic equality in Scotland. It launched in 2013, and they regularly publish papers and work exploring an alternative economic and social model for Scotland. You'll find all of that on their website at commonweal.scot. So, in part two, Robin began by making the point that although the climate emergency is a global concern with global effects, when it comes down to it, it's local decisions which drive it. It's our choices, it's our short-term goals, our own and our government's decisions, our financial centres have all produced this emergency, and we buy into that, literally. Now, if you're a Marshall Islander watching this, or a villager on the Ganges Delta in Bangladesh, you won't agree with that, and rightly so. But it's surely true of those of us in the developed world. Here's Robin.
None of this is global.
Yeah,
Every square inch of this is something we do in Scotland, even where we are trading. So even when we were buying products made in, I don't know, China or Indonesia, which emitted carbon, we're choosing to buy them. We in Scotland are choosing to buy them. We're consuming them. We're disposing of them. It's our actions that are creating this, nobody else's. And so when I realised just how local it is, because you've actually, for anyone that doesn't know, what we did was we basically went through all 7 environmental crises. Climate change is only one of them. We went through all 7 environmental crises, tried to work out what was Scotland's contribution to them and where and how. What was it we were doing that was causing them? And again, you suddenly find out they're very locally specific. It happened here. You know, you don't take 3% off the top off every peat bog everywhere at once. You take a big chunk out of a peat bog and you can drive there and say, they are that. So that, you know, this is the thing. A long time ago, I suddenly realized that negotiated global coalitions are not going to fix this. I think we've got, at the risk of channeling George W., I think we need to accept that it's coalitions of the willing. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to find that, I don't know, maybe Scotland, an independent Scotland and the Nordic countries and a Netherlands and maybe a Belgium and maybe a Portugal, maybe, well, we all do the right thing. And then we basically just boycott countries that don't. Then we start to say, right, okay, well, there's now 30 of us in a block. We will not trade with countries that don't clean up their act. You know, we will build up over the next 10 years greater capacity between us. We will trade among each other because we can trade with each other in confidence because we're all doing the right things and cleaning up our act. So if we buy something from, you know, one of these other countries, we know that it's been made to a standard that is acceptable for the environment. And if you're not making your products to that, well, you can fuck off, frankly. And if that means that you don't get to buy one particular piece of plastic tap from one particular online behemoth retailer, well, so be it. That's what we're going to have to go for. So this idea
that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's a kind of bringing together that coalition of the willing. I really like that phrase. I mean, it is maybe to do with certain countries. The ones you've mentioned are all quite small. You could probably add in New Zealand. I mean, maybe Canada. I don't know where Canada stands.
Oh no, Canada's
Canada's
a baddies as well, because the tar sands they're not as bad as they were. But they were the other country, along with Australia, which undermined 2 of the recent agreements because tar sands are particularly polluting.
They are. They're dreadful.
They're worse than fracking. But Canada was really seriously, the mining industry in Canada was pushing hard for the extraction, and they undermined. But no, what I'm saying is that, but see, the point is, once you've got 5, you'll get 6, then you'll get 7, then you'll get 12, then you'll get 20, then you'll get 50. That's how we need to do this. Because if we are moving at the pace of the slowest, which is what we're currently doing, we're moving at the pace that Australia will let us. We're moving at the pace that America or China will let us. If we keep moving at that pace, we're not going to do it. We're not going to manage it. And what's really frustrating to me is Scotland could fix this really quickly. Now, you want another cheery thing. I was talking to he's an economist that went into kind of a greater degree of environmental economics. So I was zooming with him. He's in London. I was zooming with him. We're just kind of chatting about something vaguely like this. And what he said was, actually, you know what? I did a spreadsheet, which is, if it gets really bad, where should I go?
Oh, right.
And he says, Scotland was top 3. I says, I know.
Yeah, I could imagine that. Yeah.
Scotland's a top 3 country. We have space. We have relentless volumes of energy. We have enormous forestry potential. We are comparatively high-lying, not the coastal areas, but, we've got plenty high-lying areas, so we're not going to get, massive
unlike Bangladesh, which is probably going to disappear.
Yeah. There's parts of the country, there's parts of the world that will no longer exist as parts of the world that we understand them, parts of the world that we assume. The world's going to be filled with Atlantises. There's going to be buried cities, but underwater cities all over the world. Scotland has this capacity to be, really genuinely. You know how I'm sorry for being so kind of angry and despondent, but I'm tired of hearing people in Scotland saying we can be world leading on a bunch of things that we can't be world. We can just be decent. We can catch up with what you would call the civilized world, but we're not going to be world leaders and on everything. We're not that big a country. Let's be realistic. This one we could be world leaders on.
Yeah.
We could be world leaders on decarbonisation because there's probably us. I don't know, maybe New Zealand. I'm trying to think who's got an energy capacity and a land space capacity to a population ratio. I don't think there could be many. If you're talking about not 300,000, Iceland's fine. That's good.
Iceland's fine. Yeah, Norway's not very good because it hasn't got much habit. It's got a lot of land, but it's all just goes straight up from the ocean. A lot of it, so it hasn't got much.
It's not about living on so much as resources.
Resources,
so it's forestry and renewable crop production.
Yeah.
So it's about your natural resource. It's really the kind of balance between your natural resources and your population. This is why I get so incredibly frustrated when I hear the Scottish government grandstanding about being 5% better than the rest of the world or better than Britain. I'm like, I know, but we've got about twice the potential. So 5% better is a terrible, terrible disappointment. Terrible disappointment.
Yeah.
And even at that, I cannot say this enough. It really pains me. But Chris Stark, he's the chief executive of the Climate Change Committee. So very, very highly respected expert in climate change and the UK's kind of leading. He was asked at a parliamentary inquiry in Scotland, committee inquiry, what did he make of the Scottish government's climate change plans? And he described them as being on the fringes of credibility. Now, it's a terrible flaw in our media that this hasn't been repeated back over and over and over again. It was earlier this year. This is a big deal. Nobody is saying that the Scottish government's plans are credible. But very serious people are saying, when he says fringes of credibility, that's his telephone voice. What he means is, this isn't real. And it's primarily because we've got so much lobbying by the oil and gas industry that our plans are heavily reliant on carbon capture and storage. And carbon capture and storage doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's never worked. It probably won't work. Even if it works, it only partially works. And the only thing it really does is fool people into thinking that we can keep burning oil and gas.
Yeah. It can have a bit of effect on the margins, it can have a little bit of an effect.
If somebody makes it,
solution.
If somebody can make it work, right?
Yeah,
so
someone can make it work.
If I need to say this, they've been trying for nearly 30 years. Nobody's, and these are trial upwards, right? Nobody has met a target ever in their trials upwards, right? The one that I think is the one that you need to really focus on is, and there's a big plant in the US. Now, they were doing this off an industrial plant. They're easier to capture because it's a single source of emission. And they spent, and I just make sure I'm not letting anybody think this was a kind of, oh, well, we'll take a shot at it and see. £7.5 billion was invested to put carbon capture and storage in the back of that plant. And 3 years ago now, they mothballed it. It doesn't work. Right? Now, you don't invest £7.5 billion and walk away from it if it's nearly there or it's going to work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. So we've got to wake up to this soon. But I'm going to say that one of the problems here, and again, it's another one of my frustrations, is that Scotland's in this awful weird place, which is that I'm not going to be partisan, not by any manner of means all, but an awful lot of the people who would be the natural climate agitators in Scotland are also strong indie supporters. And we've got this polarisation problem whereby the constitutional debate's driving people into purely pro-India or anti-India camps. Now, this does split the environmental movement a little bit, although not as much as some would like you. Most progressives are India sympathetic. But what it means is there's this kind of, well, we can't be criticising our own side too much. Unfortunately, our own side is the government. And the government needs to be criticised very severely over this.
Yeah.
And this is one of our problems, is that if you say the Scottish government is doing terribly, someone will say, oh, you're a unionist plant, or you're talking down Scotland, or whatever it is. And you say, no, but you would not be arguing that if it wasn't for this strange. But you're a progressively minded person. You must know that doing basically the same as the UK is not enough. And it's this awful dynamic in Scotland, is there's not a strong voice saying this isn't good enough. Now, you've got it recently. You've got quite a lot of commentators saying it, to which I say, hallelujah, thank God. We need more of you to say this more often until the public understands it's true. But we don't really have. I mean, go on. Who's the household name that's the face of climate change action in Scotland? I mean, we don't really have such a thing, and that's the concern. That's a concern. And I don't really watch BBC a lot. I don't watch broadcasts. It's nothing to do with boycotting the BBC. It's just that, it's just here, top tip, folks. I was a political lobbyist. If you want to know what politicians are doing, don't listen to them. It's quite important. Just focus on what they're doing, not what they're saying. And so I don't tend to watch. If I want to know what politicians are doing, I read it in writing where I can filter out the faff. But anyway, I don't really watch the BBC very much. But as far as I can tell, from what I've seen of what I know, BBC Scotland isn't exactly challenging the Scottish government on the state of progress, or what's happening, or what they're doing. And if we don't get the pressure on them, if we don't have the pressure on the Scottish government, then it will all drift. We need to make this an urgent issue now. And I'll tell you just one more thing for anyone that's not familiar with the work. The reason it's an urgent issue is it's a fair bit before you can get started properly. So a lot of the vast majority of what we need to do to decarbonise is basically a big engineering job. And you can't just say, right, we've changed our mind, we're going to start tomorrow. Because what you're actually saying is, right, we've changed our mind, we're going to start tomorrow to do the surveying, planning, workforce development, supply chain development, and securing. All of these things need to be done before you dig a hole. And I mean, if we're being generous, this is the kind of sad sack thing I ask, right? So I had a coffee with the Danish embassy's leading expert in district heating. And we'd done lots of policy work in district heating already, so I knew most of the basics. And we sat having this coffee, and the only thing I kept badgering him on was, what's your lead times? What's your lead times?
Yeah.
And which is really geek. But the answer is they're very used to it. So they've got entire industries that are used to installing and running and managing district heating. And for them, if you were going to pick a small town and say, do that, they're looking at a lead time of 3 to 4 years. And that's with a full workforce and good knowledge and a bunch of companies that do the technologies and a lot of installers and the infrastructure behind it, because they've got lots of district heating already and so on. And they're kind of 3 or 4 years before you get started.
Yeah.
We
So
need to get started to get started.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say we need to get started. Well, maybe our new Minister for Green Jobs and Green Skills will help with that a bit. We need to get started. And I mean, what you were saying earlier about that coalition of the willing, I mean, like I said at the beginning, I haven't been very optimistic about, this COP being a success. But actually, if what came out of it was a bit more of a definite move of getting the people who are willing together to start acting, that would land on me. That would seem to me to be a success.
There's a theory which comes from the dance floor, I believe. This is genuinely a social psychological theory, which is the two things you need are the first mover and the second mover.
Yeah.
Right? So if you think about an empty dance floor at a Scottish wedding, because we're not that inhibited until we're blootered that we've only got on the dance floor. I will, but I like my dancing.
Well, everyone in our family is always up first. So
that's great.
Yeah,
so you know what it is then.
Oh, I know what it is, yeah.
Right, so the first person to go into a dance floor, first couple, whatever, to go into a dance floor, that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, it is.
And then what you watch is everyone else stands round and going, I quite fancy a wee jig, but I'm not going second. Right? And so what you get is the second person that goes up, and then it's like, right, that's fine, that's us, permission now, and it goes. Now I've seen occasions, I've been the first mover when there wasn't a second mover, and it's like, I can't dance for 10 minutes here on my own. Everybody in this room's looking at me. I just did anyway, bollocks to it. But what we're needing globally is a first mover and a second mover.
Yeah.
We need somebody to start doing this, and we need them to start talking to somebody else.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd like to see Scotland as the first mover. And I would like to see us talking to, I don't know, I mean, what the Nordics would be obvious options, but don't underestimate the capacity to talk to people further afield. I mean, it doesn't have to be local. We could tie up with one of the more progressive of the Latin American countries.
Well, I was going to say, actually, Nicaragua came to mind.
Costa Rica. Doing some wonderful things.
Yeah,
You've got places like
New Zealand's an obvious one, but Central America.
And you've got somewhere like Bhutan, which is way ahead.
Yeah, way
of
ahead.
Everybody.
Yeah,
so I kind of start saying, when you stop and you say, oh, but that sounds awfully restrictive, McAlpine. We're only allowed to buy things from others who are in the coalition. I'm saying, well, Costa Rican coffee is pretty good. It's not like we're saying here that we are going to give up the world. What we're saying is this is really urgent. We need to do something. And this is why I've been, I wrote this a few years ago. It only came back to me recently, a couple of years ago. We went on holiday, because this is very common with my poor children. We went on holiday to Sweden, pissed down the whole time. And we went into a shop and someone says, oh, you've got a Scottish accent, the local guy. I says, aye, we're just here on holiday. He says, why? I says, I know, it's just like being in bloody Edinburgh with different accents. But it was pissing me around the whole time. But I did the boat tour, and I came away with that. I don't know how to phrase it. It was this. There was a kind of stunned anger. Was what I felt. A determination, because in Sweden in the 70s. They said, we've got a problem here. We're just going to build 1 million houses in 10 years. Good houses, district heating, properly done, the whole thing. And there was a whole bunch of other things they did. There was a whole programme. And they just buggered off and did it. I mean, they just did it. And you're like, we're patting ourselves on the back if we're building 50. I mean, this was not all the houses that were built in Sweden. This was 1 million top quality houses. That's 1/10 at the time, nearly, of the entire population. It's 1 in 10 people. They built a brand new house for them. These were quality houses in impressive blocks built by the public sector. We pat ourselves in the back for a couple of 100 council houses a year now, and then we claim that the rest of them are also affordable housing, but they're not. I mean, it's not. It's just, they're just private sector developments.
I mean, all of that's pretty impressive. And
they had nothing.
Look, let's
they had nothing that we don't, apart from independence. They had nothing that we don't, except for, and this is the point, just a bit of ambition and just a bit of confidence.
Yeah.
That's what we're lacking, ambition and confidence. We don't have the ambition, we don't have the confidence. And I came away from it. I remember I was stepping off that boat when we got back. And I remember saying to my partner, Christina, I says, no, I'm sorry. I am determined. At that point, I think I was about 45. So I am determined before I'm dead that Scotland does something brave and ambitious and big and major, just something. We've been 30 years now, more 40 years now, twiddling our fingers. We got a parliament and we didn't use it well enough. What's the most exciting thing that happened in Scotland? But I mean, qualifying for the Euros. I mean, what's the big thing that we did in Scotland that you would honestly point at and say, see, we can do stuff. I don't know what it is, and it's really, really sad. This is what we can do. I've become convinced that this is the thing that we can do in my lifetime, that, you look back and you say, God, weren't we brilliant? Because it's got to be something.
I'll tell you, here's a question then for you about what you might be able to do. It's come from because we're on live streaming to our Facebook Indie Live Radio page. It's actually Val Gold, whom you know. I know you know Val. What three top things could be done to improve public transport for ordinary folk in Scotland?
Now, you see, it's straightforward. That's one of the most difficult questions, I believe. That's one of the most difficult questions in the entire field of climate change mitigation. The reason for this is, if you look at the vast bulk of what we've got to do, heating, house insulation, electricity generation, food production, land management, in the vast majority of it, we know what we're doing. We know the technologies. It's old technologies that fixes the problem. There's nothing particularly complicated about it. That's different with transport. There's a bunch of things happening in transport just now, technology things. And the technology things that are happening in transport are happening very fast. And it's quite difficult to tell where they're going to end up. Now, I think I know where they're going to end up, but this is very early in the cycle. And this is where it starts to get really complicated, because I know I'm a bit off kilter with a lot of the environmental movement in this one, but I know everyone thinks that public transport is the way. But actually, I don't think that's going to be the way it goes. I think it's going to go more personalised transport. So people tell me, yeah, but buses are so efficient because you pack all those people on, which means that the efficiency of shifting a bus around is, to which I say, you've never been on the 23 to Trinity at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's a giant,
pretty empty. Yeah.
Well, I did it once. It was a giant hunk of metal dragging me and 2 old ladies. I was going down to Atlantic Quay for a meeting, and there was 2 old ladies getting home or something. I don't know, been up shopping in Jenner's. It was Trinity after all. And I was saying, this isn't efficient at all. 3 of us could have gone in a taxi. You see, this is what I think is going to happen. I think what's going to happen is cars are going to go driverless. And to make that really work, we're going to ban human drivers from the roads. So human drivers are really bad. Really bad. I mean, almost all the problems with road networks are because of human drivers. And if anybody's really geekily interested in this, it's largely because when we brake a bit too hard. And when we accelerate a bit too hard. And so what this does is it creates what's known as, this is wave science, it's what's known as rarefactions and condensations. So it stretches out and it compresses and it stretches out and it compresses. And in physics, when you keep doing that, if you stretch out and you compress and you stretch out and you compress, what it does is that process of stretching and compressing, it absorbs energy. Now, if you take that analogy and you apply it to the M8 going into Glasgow, well, what happens is every time somebody slows down, everyone behind them slows down, and it gets worse and worse and worse the further you go back. And then when they accelerate off, everyone accelerates off, but it stretches out again. But they stretch out too fast, so the ones at the back can't. So have you ever been in one of those traffic jams in a motorway where you get to the end of it and there's nothing there?
There's nothing there. Yeah.
That's what that is. Yeah. That's purely, that can happen because one human slams their feet in the brakes when the person behind them is not accepting, and the person behind that, and the person behind that, and the person behind that. See if all vehicles accelerated and slowed down at a consistent pace. Most of our traffic congestion.
Well, I have often sat in traffic jams and thought that exact thing, actually, usually with a few swear words kind of thrown in, because you're thinking, for goodness sake. But come on, answer here's what I think.
This is the problem. This is what I'm going to say. Here's what I think is going to happen. We are going to end up in a world where you will pull out your smartphone, take your, whatever the hell that is in 20 years, take out an app, click, move me. You're going to say one person, no luggage, going here, and it'll know where you are at the moment. And within 20 seconds, a car will turn up, and a vehicle will turn up. You'll just climb in it and you'll go. And if you're just one person going down to Trinity, it'll be a one-person pod car. And if you're a family of 6 going to the airport with lots of luggage, they'll send you a car. You'll say 6 people, luggage, airport. They'll send you a bigger one. So if you stop and you think about what that would mean, you would have the entire of, I don't know, pick an artery road, Princess Street, Queen Street in Edinburgh. I need to better start using Aberdeen or Dundee as examples here. I've been too central. But and what you'll have is most people in cities travel alone. So what you'll have is lots and lots of pod cars, 2 abreast in the roads, about 10 centimetres apart from each other, moving at a constant speed all the way through the city. It moves people really fast.
These are driverless.
Yeah. There'll be no driver. That won't happen. That'll be gone. And so what I mean by that is nobody's going to own a car. I think this is where there's a big change. I don't think anyone's going to own a car. I think you'd be mad to own a car. Some people might lease out in a rural area. You might lease a car because here you might be 5 minutes before you can get a car out here, something like that. I don't know. And this is the problem. This is the problem, is that I think that there's going to be bigger changes in the future of transport than we think there's going to be, but we don't quite know what they are. And that's the one bit of our plan where we said, right, the one thing we almost certainly know is that there's going to be, electric is going to be at the heart of it. So bigger vans and lorries, certainly trains, and certainly sea ferries, bigger boats, they're all probably going to run on hydrogen. There's weight reasons and charges, but they're probably going to run on hydrogen. All other transport, apart from airplanes, is going to run electric. So the key thing that we can do is get the charging infrastructure in place for whatever comes next. Even that isn't straightforward. Because if I'm right and you don't own a car, then the second you get out a car, you would think about it again, it'll know when it needs to, and it'll bugger off and charge itself somewhere. So you can have all your charging taking place in a defunct. There'll be more. You've got to really think about the changes. This is what I mean. No road markings. The roads can be narrower. No further need for car parks. Car parks will be a thing of the past. You will have no need for a garage. Everyone's garage can become a home office or whatever they want to do, a gym, whatever you want it to be. No more traffic cops. There will never be another. Traffic cops will just disappear. But in those cases, you can just take a defunct, A defunct multi-story. The cars will bugger off there and charge themselves. Meanwhile, if I'm wrong and everyone owns their own electric car, somehow we're going to have to work out how to charge them, probably overnight where they're parked. And that's a nightmare, because it's no bother if you've got your own drive and you're a single-story house, or if you've got a garage, ideally, because you can just charge it in there. But if you park street side, what are you going to do? Run a cable from your front door down through your garden across the pavement and into your car? Or are we going to put street side car charging up every residential street? Now that's a massive, massive job. I mean, that's becoming the size of the problem of the district heating. Or do we get new technologies in? Can we increase the pace of battery charging? Or do we go for battery swapping, where the batteries get charged outside the car, and when it's time, you drive your car to what would have been a petrol station, and they just swap the batteries out for you. So it's, like automated, and off you go. Or, so to answer the question, the problem I have with transport, I'm going to say it again, I'm not what you would call in the mainstream of thinking in this in the moment, but I really do think that's where we're going to go. At the moment, what we could really do is just invest in a proper integrated public transport network for the time being that we've got. And the First Minister was challenged earlier in the week about why it was that a unified travel card could be given to all the delegates at COP, but that such a scheme couldn't exist for Scotland. And the answer to that is because we've got a massively deregulated and fragmented transport system. And what COP is really getting is legalised fare dodging. So this is just a card. The Scottish Government's negotiated with all the transport providers and said, right, this is just a card. Let this person on for nothing. We'll give you a bung. If you're going to prepay it, which is what this would be, there's a lot more logistics, and you really want to get your transport properly coordinated. But that sort of thing, to make it easily, seamlessly possible to travel around with a single payment without planning your journey using a spreadsheet before you go anywhere.
So I'm not sure if we did get three top things in reply to Val's question.
One
of them is driverless cars.
No, driverless is where I think we go to.
Yeah,
in the short term, integrated travel cards.
Yep.
A national transport company to properly coordinate and regulate the existing transport providers that we've got, so they start to integrate and link up with each other. I would take a fair chunk of it back into collective ownership myself. And straightforwardly, we need to invest more. So we're closing stations, railway stations at the moment. We need to not be doing that. We need to be expanding the public transport. So those are the three things that we can do immediately. But I would say, I really would kind of emphasize that this is probably, I don't think that's going to be what transport looks like soon.